You're 3 weeks into the blackout. It's January. The kind of January where your breath freezes the moment it leaves your mouth, where the air itself feels like it's trying to kill you. Inside your house, it's not much better. The propane heater that's been running nonstop since the power went out finally sputters, coughs once, and goes silent. You check the gauge on the tank. Empty. You have two more in the garage, and they're empty too. You burned through all three in 72 hours, and now you're sitting in a house that's dropping 1 degree every 15 minutes. By dawn, the thermometer inside reads 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Your two children don't wake up. They went to sleep in their sleeping bags, huddled together, and hypothermia claimed them silently in the night while you were unconscious in the next room. You thought 3 tanks would be enough? You were wrong. Welcome to the propane trap. Let's be clear about something right now. Propane is not a survival solution. It's a short-term comfort device that creates a fatal dependency. When you're heating a space 24 hours a day, in the dead of winter, a standard 20-pound propane tank lasts somewhere between 10 and 20 hours, depending on your heater settings. That means in realistic winter conditions, where you're running heat 12 to 18 hours a day just to keep the inside temperature above freezing, you're burning through 1 to 2 full tanks every single day. Heat your space for 30 days, you'd need 30 to 60 tanks. That's 600 to 1,200 pounds of pressurized explosive fuel sitting in your garage or shed. The cost alone, even before collapse, runs you $600 to $1,200. And here's the part that kills you. In a grid down scenario, there are no refills. Propane requires industrial refining, transportation infrastructure, and functioning fuel depots. All of that is gone. When your stockpile runs dry, you don't get to call for a truck. You sit in the cold and you die. But the math isn't even the worst part. Propane creates failure modes that will kill you in ways you're not thinking about. First, there's carbon monoxide. When you burn propane indoors, you're producing carbon monoxide, an odorless, colorless gas that binds to your hemoglobin and suffocates you from the inside. You think you're staying warm, but you're actually poisoning yourself. In a normal situation, you crack a window, you ventilate, but in a grid down winter, you're trying to conserve every single BTU of heat. You seal the space tight, that's when the silent killer gets you. You go to sleep warm, and you don't wake up. Second, propane tanks are pressurized bombs, a damaged valve, corrosion, and impact, and you've got a catastrophic explosion on your hands. And in collapse, there's no fire department, no ambulance, no burn unit. You're on your own, and if you survive the blast, you're dealing with burns, shrapnel wounds, and no medical infrastructure.
Third, propane creates a passive heating mindset.
You turn a knob, and the heat comes. You never develop the skills or systems to generate and manage warmth without fuel. So when the tanks run out, you're not just out of propane. You're out of options. You panic. You freeze. You die. Now, let me tell you what the pioneers did. The people who survived winters in the 1800s didn't have propane. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have modern insulation or central heating or any of the infrastructure you take for granted. They faced minus 30-degree nights in log cabins with gaps in the walls and drafts that would strip the heat from your skin in minutes. And they survived. Not because they were tougher or more resilient, though they were both of those things. They survived because they understood something you've forgotten. Heat is not something you consume. It's something you store. The pioneer strategy was simple, elegant, and based on physics that hasn't changed in 200 years. During the day, they burned a fire in a central fireplace or stove. That fire wasn't just for immediate warmth, it was a charging station for thermal mass. They would take stones, bricks, chunks of cast iron, and place them directly in the fire or in the coals. Those objects would sit there for hours, absorbing heat, storing energy. Then, when night came and the fire died down, they would take those superheated stones, wrap them in cloth, and carry them to their beds. The stones would radiate heat for 6 to 10 hours. All night long, they stayed warm, without a single flame in the sleeping area. No combustion, no carbon monoxide, no fuel consumption during the hours they were most vulnerable. This is thermal mass heating, and it works because of a principle called specific heat capacity, which is the amount of energy a material can absorb and hold per unit of mass. Stone and brick have high thermal mass. They soak up enormous amounts of heat and release it slowly over time. This is passive radiant heating. The heat doesn't come from fire. It comes from stored energy, and it continues long after the fire is out. So let's talk about how you actually do this, because the details matter. The first thing you need to understand is that not all stones are safe. If you pick the wrong rock and throw it in a fire, it can explode. I'm not talking about a little crack. I'm talking about a pressurized fragmentation event that turns stone into shrapnel. The reason this happens is because some stones, particularly river rocks and sedimentary stones, have tiny pockets of water trapped inside. When you heat them, that water turns to steam. Steam expands, pressure builds inside the stone, and if the rock can't vent that pressure, it detonates. People have been blinded, burned, and killed by exploding stones. So here's what you use: granite, basalt, soapstone, and slate. These are dense, stable stones with low porosity. They heat evenly and don't contain trapped moisture. Here's what you absolutely do not use: river rocks, sandstone, limestone, or shale. These are porous, layered, or water-bearing stones that will fail catastrophically under heat. The safest way to identify good stones is to find them dry and above ground. Avoid anything that's been sitting in or near water. Look for stones that are solid, dense, and free of visible cracks or layers. The first time you heat a new stone, do it outdoors and away from people. If you hear hissing or cracking sounds, that's steam escaping or the stone fracturing. Discard it immediately. Once you've identified safe stones, the next step is the heating process. You need a fire, a bed of coals, or even a solar concentrator if it's a clear winter day. Place your stones directly into the heat source and leave them there for 2 to 4 hours. Your goal is to get the surface of the stone too hot to touch with bare skin, which usually means an internal temperature somewhere between 300 and 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Use metal tongs or thick leather gloves to move them. Never handle them directly. Now comes the critical step: the wrap. You cannot, under any circumstances, place a hot stone directly against skin or fabric. It will cause severe burns. You need to wrap the stone in multiple layers of thick material. Wool blankets are ideal because wool is naturally fire resistant and has excellent insulating properties. Canvas, denim, or layered towels also work. The goal is to create a barrier that slows the release of heat. You want the warmth to radiate out gradually over hours, not all at once in the first 15 minutes. The wrap also protects your bedding and skin from accidental contact. Once the stone is wrapped, you deploy it. If you're warming a bed, place the stone at the foot of the bed 20 to 30 minutes before you plan to sleep. This preheats your sleeping bag or blankets. When you get in, position the stone near your feet, which are the coldest part of your body and critical for maintaining circulation. If you're using the stone for mobile warmth, you can wrap smaller fist-sized stones and carry them in your pockets or hold them against your core. You can rotate them between your body and the fire, keeping a constant supply of heat. If you're trying to warm a room, you place a large stone, something in the 20 to 50 pound range, on a non-flammable surface like a brick, metal tray, or tile. It will radiate heat in all directions for hours. Let's talk about the physics of why this works so well. Heat moves according to the second law of thermodynamics, which states that heat always flows from hotter objects to cooler objects until thermal equilibrium is reached. A stone that's been heated to 400 degrees has an enormous reservoir of stored energy. Because stone has relatively low thermal conductivity, it doesn't dump that energy all at once. It releases it slowly, steadily, over a long period of time. The larger the stone, the more mass it has, and the more energy it can store. A fist-sized stone that weighs 2 to 3 pounds will stay warm for 2 to 4 hours. A stone the size of a bowling ball, maybe 10 to 15 pounds, will radiate heat for 6 to 8 hours. A large hearthstone weighing 40 to 60 pounds can stay warm for 10 to 12 hours. Compare that to propane, which burns hot and fast and stops the instant the fuel runs out. A stone is a battery. Propane is a fuse. One stores energy and releases it over time. The other consumes itself and leaves you with nothing. Now let's go deeper, because this isn't just a bed warmer trick. This is a complete heating philosophy, and if you understand the principle, you can scale it to heat entire structures with almost no fuel. The Scandinavians figured this out centuries ago with something called a masonry heater. The concept is simple. You build a large structure of stone or brick around and above a firebox. You light a fire inside, and the flames and smoke travel through channels in the mass, heating the entire structure. Once the fire dies, the stone or brick continues to radiate heat into the room for 12 to 24 hours. The difference between an open fire and a masonry heater is staggering. An open fire loses most of its heat up the chimney. A masonry heater captures that energy in thermal mass and releases it slowly into your living space. You can build a rough version of this in a collapse scenario. Stack bricks or stones around a small fire pit. Create channels for the smoke to travel through the mass before exiting. It won't be elegant, but it will work. You burn a small hot fire once a day, and the mass keeps you warm all night. You can also use solar energy to charge your thermal mass for free. If you have a south-facing window or a simple greenhouse, you can pile dark-colored stones inside where they'll be exposed to direct sunlight. Even in winter, on a clear day, the sun delivers significant solar radiation. Dark stone absorbs both visible and infrared light. The thermal mass holds that energy far longer than air ever could. At night, you bring the stones inside or simply let them radiate into the attached structure. This is passive solar heating, and it's been used by desert and high altitude cultures for thousands of years. Water also works as thermal mass, and in some ways, it's even better than stone. Water has a higher specific heat capacity than stone, which means it stores more energy per pound. You heat water to near boiling, around 180 to 200 degrees. Pour it into a thick-walled jug or metal canteen and wrap it heavily in towels. It will last 6 to 10 hours as a bed warmer. The risk with water is leaks and spills, which can cause burns, so you need sealable, heat-safe containers. But if you can manage that risk, water is an excellent thermal battery. Let's talk about the daily rhythm of this system, because that's what makes it sustainable. Pioneers didn't think in terms of individual tasks. They thought in cycles. In the morning, between 6 and 10, you rebuild the fire from the coals that are still smoldering from the night before. You start heating stones for the evening. You use the fire to cook, to boil water, to heat your space during the active hours of the day. At midday from 10 to 4, the fire is at its peak. You rotate stones. The ones that are fully heated get moved to insulated storage. The cold ones get placed into the coals. If it's sunny, you charge additional stones using solar heat. In the evening, from 4 to 10, you let the fire die down to coals. You deploy your heated stones to the beds and the living areas. You seal and insulate the sleeping zones. Then, from 10 at night to 6 in the morning, there's no active fire. The thermal mass provides all the heat. You wake to coals that are still viable enough to restart the fire without needing to build it from scratch. This is a closed-loop system. The fire burns for 8 to 12 hours, but the heat continues for 24. That means you're cutting your fuel consumption by 50 to 70% compared to a system where you're burning fire around the clock just to stay warm. Now let's talk about what can go wrong, because if you do this incorrectly, you can hurt yourself or die. The most common injury is burns. If you don't wrap the stone properly, or if you test the warmth by touching it directly, you'll get a contact burn that can be severe. The treatment in a collapse scenario is limited. You cool the burn with water that's cool but not ice cold. You cover it with a clean, dry dressing. If you have honey or silver-infused cloth, those work as antimicrobials. But the best strategy is prevention. Always wrap thoroughly. Always test the heat level through the wrap before placing it near skin. The catastrophic failure mode is an exploding stone. If you use a river rock or a stone with trapped moisture, the steam pressure will eventually exceed the tensile strength of the rock, and it will fracture violently. Stone fragments become shrapnel. They can blind you, cut you, embed in your skin. The first time you heat any new stone, do it outside, away from people and animals. Listen carefully. If you hear hissing, popping, or cracking, get away from it and don't use it again. Fire spread is another risk. If you place a hot stone on a flammable surface like a wood floor or cloth, you can start a fire. If the wrap itself is frayed, oil-soaked, or too thin, it can ignite. Always use a non-flammable base, a metal tray, a brick, a tile. Make sure your wrap is clean and thick. And if you're heating stones indoors with an open fire, you're still producing carbon monoxide. You need ventilation, a chimney, a stovepipe, something that vents the smoke outside. If you don't have proper venting, Heat your stones in an outdoor fire and carry them inside after they're charged. You eliminate the combustion risk entirely. So let's do a direct comparison. Propane versus thermal mass. Propane requires fossil fuel, which is finite and non renewable. Thermal mass uses any heat source wood, charcoal, even the sun. Propane requires resupply, which is impossible in collapse. Stones are reusable forever. Propane provides continuous heat while the fuel lasts, then nothing. Thermal mass provides 6 to 12 hours of heat per cycle. Propane creates carbon monoxide and explosion risk indoors. Stones produce zero emissions after deployment. Propane hisses and makes noise. Stones are silent. Propane requires no skill. You turn a knob. Thermal mass requires moderate skill, heating, wrapping, timing. But once you learn it, it's yours forever. Propane fails when it runs out, when the tank leaks, when the regulator breaks, when the tank corrodes. Stones fail when they crack, and you replace them. Propane, if you're trying to heat for 30 days, requires 600 to 1,200 pounds of tanks. Thermal mass requires 50 to 200 pounds of stones that you reuse every single day. Propane costs $600 to $1,200 plus refills. Stones cost nothing. You find them on the ground. Propane makes you dependent on an industrial supply chain. Stones make you self-sufficient. Let's talk about the science of why some materials hold heat better than others. Because if you understand this, you can make better decisions in the field. Specific heat capacity is a measure of how much energy it takes to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius. The higher the number, the more heat the material can store, and the longer it will stay warm. Water has the highest specific heat capacity of any common material, 4,186 joules per kilogram per degree Celsius. That's why water is the best heat battery if you can contain it safely. Brick comes in around 840. Granite is around 790. Iron and steel are only around 450, which means they heat up fast, but also cool down fast. Sand is around 830, which makes it useful if you pack it into bags for distributed thermal mass. For portability, you want smaller, dense stones that you can carry and rotate. For building permanent structures, you want stacked brick or stone walls and benches that absorb heat during the day and release it at night. Thermal mass works best when you pair it with aggressive insulation, because heat retention is a force multiplier. Heat escapes your space through 3 mechanisms: conduction, which is heat moving through solid materials like walls and floors; convection, which is heat carried away by moving air and drafts; and radiation, which is infrared energy leaving warm surfaces. If you don't address all 3, your thermal mass will drain faster than it should. Here's how you retain heat in a collapse-friendly way. First, shrink your living space. Don't try to heat the whole house. Pick one room and seal off the rest. Second, block drafts. Shove towels under doors, cover windows with plastic sheeting, which creates a dead air gap that acts as insulation. Third, use thermal curtains. Hang heavy blankets, tarps, or layered fabric over windows at night. During the day, if it's sunny, let the light in to gain passive solar heat. At night, cover everything to prevent radiative heat loss. Fourth, insulate your floor. Carpet, cardboard, straw, foam mats. Anything that creates a barrier between you and the cold ground. Heat loss through floors is massive, especially if you're over a basement or crawl space. Fifth, concentrate body heat. Put multiple people in one sleeping area. Shared body heat combined with hot stones means you need far less external heating. A well-insulated space with thermal mass will hold heat for 12 hours or more with a single stone load. This system scales. If you're one person or a small family, you only need 3 to 5 large stones per night. You can heat them with a small fire or a rocket stove. It's portable, low maintenance, and efficient. If you're in a group of 10 to 30 people, you build a central masonry heater or stone fireplace. You heat the mass once a day and it radiates warmth to everyone. You distribute smaller stones to individual beds. The fuel efficiency compared to heating many individual spaces is staggering. And here's something nobody talks about. The person who understands thermal mass physics becomes valuable. You can design efficient heaters. You can teach safe stone selection. You can build masonry stoves. In a post-collapse economy, that skill is currency. It's status. It's security. Now let's talk about what happens to the people who don't know this. By week 3, the propane dependent are out of fuel. They start burning furniture, books, anything that will combust. The smoke fills the house because they don't have proper ventilation. They get smoke inhalation, carbon monoxide poisoning, or they start structure fires they can't control. Or they simply freeze because they never learned how to manage heat. Then there are the people who try to use stones but don't know the rules. They get severe burns, shrapnel wounds, and in a world with no hospitals, those injuries lead to infection, sepsis, and death. The unprepared have no knowledge of thermal mass. They have no insulation strategy. They burn through firewood in days trying to heat the whole house with an open fire. By midwinter, they're out of fuel. Hypothermia takes the children and the elderly first, then the adults. The only ones who survive are the ones who understand that heat is a physics problem, not a shopping problem. The modern survival industry wants you to believe you can buy your way to safety. They want you to think that preparedness is about credit cards and gear lists and stockpiles of consumer products. And yeah, some of that stuff helps in the short term, but real survival, long-term survival, is about understanding principles. It's about knowing how energy moves, how materials behave, how systems work. Thermal mass heating costs you nothing. It requires no supply chain. It works with knowledge and effort. Propane makes you comfortable until it doesn't. Stones make you capable. Propane is a product you consume. Stones are a system you operate. This isn't primitive technology. It's physics. It's specific heat capacity, thermal conductivity, radiant heat transfer. The pioneers weren't dumb. They understood energy better than most people alive today. We forgot because we outsourced our survival to the grid. We let corporations and utilities handle heat for us, and we lost the skills. Here's what you do this week. You find 3 to 5 safe stones: granite, basalt, soapstone. You test heat one of them outdoors in a fire pit or grill. You wrap it in cloth, and you time how long it stays warm. You get a feel for the process. This month, you build or acquire a small fire source, a rocket stove, a fire pit, something you can use to heat stones on demand. You practice the full cycle, charge the stones, wrap them, deploy them to your bed. You experiment with insulation in one room of your house. You figure out where the drafts are, where the heat escapes, and you start plugging those leaks. This winter, you run a grid down night. You turn off your electric heat, your propane, everything. You rely entirely on thermal mass. You see what works and what doesn't. You identify your weak points. You refine the system until you're comfortable. Because when the real blackout comes, you won't have time to learn. You'll have the skills you practiced, or you'll have nothing. So here's my question for you. What's your heating plan when the propane runs out? Have you ever used hot stones or thermal mass? Have you tested it, practiced it, failed at it, and learned from the failure? Or are you still assuming the grid will come back, the trucks will deliver, and the modern world will reassemble itself around you while you wait in the cold? Because it won't. The pioneers survived with stones and fire and knowledge. You've got access to the same physics they did. The only question is whether you'll use it. Propane runs out in 3 days. Stones last forever. Choose your heat source like your life depends on it. Because when the lights go out and the temperature drops and the supply chain is gone, it does.